7 basic MTB skills. They're things that I do on my bike, helps me feel more confident on the bike. I think you might find it useful. Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. Today I'm bringing you a pretty cool video. I think you guys might enjoy it and I think you might find it useful. Hopefully you do. What this video is 7 basic MTB skills that you can bring to your trails. They're things that I do on my bike that I feel helps my riding, helps me feel more confident on the bike, more stable on the bike, and I just wanted to pass them tips on to you guys so you can maybe adopt some of them for yourself or try them out and see if it works for you, see if it helps you out. The cool thing about this video is that some of the tips have come personally from my riding rather than taking it from general biking, because if you watch other MTB skills videos you'll often find they'll have more or less the same tips but they'll just be explaining it in a different way just to avoid copying, and yeah, hopefully it'll help you improve. So without rambling on anymore, let's get on to tip number 1. Tip number 1 is all about foot positioning on your pedals, and this is one of the tips I don't think anyone's actually mentioned before because it's quite a weird one. I don't really know if everyone's going to benefit from it. Some people will prefer to ride differently with their foot positioning. It's all down to preference in the end, but for me this tip helps me keep a lot of stability on the bike and helps me keep my shoes sort of locked into the pedals. Sometimes I ride in shoes that aren't very grippy, so they lack the ability to actually stay on the pedals all the time, like especially when you're going into turns or doing jumps or stuff. What I like to do when I'm dropping in is I like to have my feet like this, where they're really close to the crank arm, and as you can see there's some pedal to the left of my foot that I'm not covering with my shoe. Most people would ride their bikes kind of like this with their shoe fully on the pedal, but the way I work it out is if you put your crank arm down like this, if your shoe is rubbing on the crank arm, then that's how I like to have my feet positionings. So when you're pedaling along, if you just move your feet inwards to the crank slightly and notice the crank rubbing against your shoe each time it goes past, that's how I ride with my pedals. So with this technique I want you guys to go out and try it and let me know in the comments if this helps you out. I think it does for me. It's just become a preference that I've sort of adopted over my time of biking. So yeah, make the crank arm rub your shoe, and that is tip number 1. One thing I will mention though is that it can sometimes leave a mark on the inside of your shoe, but just make sure whatever shoes you're using to do this you don't really care about too much. The second tip is to do with hand positioning. So we've done feet, now we're on to hands. This tip you might have seen in other videos before, or you might see it as something that's common sense, but for me, hand positioning, I like to have a good inch of the bar on the outside of my hand, if that makes sense. I never ride my hands fully at the maximum width of the bars. I find that that feels really weird and it's a bit of a struggle to reach my brake positioning. If you're riding pill grips or a similar length grip, I like to ride this part of my hand on the actual lock-on part of the grip. That's sort of my guide to where to put my hands, and I normally, when I put my hands on my bike, I'll put them on like that so that I know I've got the right positioning. From there I line up the brakes so that the end of the brake lever is just about on my finger, and yeah, that works awesome. I like this positioning because your arms are just out of line of your shoulders, and that's where I think they need to be. If they're in line with your shoulders, you sort of lack the ability to compress into jumps, but if they're too far away, I think you start losing control of the bike, especially when you're tackling like downhill rooty sections. Definitely give it a try and hopefully it'll help you out. Next tip's another one that people don't really seem to speak about, but unfortunately because I'm a Burke, I'm not really demonstrating it very well at the moment, and that is clothing. You need to wear thick clothing, I find, when you're riding your bike, especially in the winter. Stuff always hurts when it's colder. If you watch my other videos you'll know I wear that nice big black puffy like jacket coat thing, and that helps for if I crash. Got a weird sort of material on the outside that just slides along the ground quite easy. If you've ever crashed in a t-shirt you'll know that skin's quite grippy, so it grips to the floor. You usually end up with a nice graze all over your arm. Scrapes aren't too bad, especially in the summer when it's boiling. You're obviously not going to be wearing too thicker clothing. If you can wear thick clothing and prevent scrapes, definitely do it, and yeah, it helps me out quite a lot. Another way it helps is that it kind of boosts my confidence. Sometimes it sort of inhibits maneuverability, like if I'm wearing a big thick clunky jacket, I can't really, you know, get all the like smashing into rooty rock sections or like doing some stuff over the jumps. It can be a bit hard and restrictive, but at the same time it gives me a level of confidence that if I crash on something, it's going to hurt a little bit less than if I was wearing something thin. Tip number 4 is slightly more common. You might have seen it being mentioned in other videos before, but it is use a dropper post. I have a dropper post on this bike. It's really good, and the way it's useful is for if you're doing enduro-y type of bike rides. The dropper really helps out because I can push up the level of my seat to help me do big hill climbs, and then I drop it back down and I'm tackling a downhill section, so you don't want the seat to be in the way. And it's really annoying if you don't have a dropper that you have to stop and adjust it manually each time you get to a different sort of section. If you're thinking of doing races, I'd say you need one of these, because you're obviously not going to want to be stopping in the middle of your race run to adjust your seat. So get yourself a dropper. If you haven't got one already, I'm pretty sure you can get some quite cheap ones. I don't know much about it. Any dropper works as long as it drops and comes back up. You're golden. So step 5 is one that you may have heard of as well already, but it's something that people are kind of scared to do because of the potential crashes it can cause, and that is using your front brake when you're biking. The front brake is actually a very useful and powerful tool of your braking arsenal. You'll find that the front brake actually has the most braking force, and you'll sometimes also find that the front disc is normally bigger than the back disc, and that is literally due to the fact that the front can take more force, so bigger disc, there you go. You'll notice that if you pull your back brake too hard, your back brake will lock up, the back wheel will lock up, and you'll go into a skid, and when you're skidding, the braking force isn't as good as it could be because it's still sliding along the floor. The way with braking, you need to like not lock up your brakes as much as you can, unless you're purposely doing it to like fire into a berm or something. And what I know some people are scared of doing is like using the front brake when you're going down steep stuff, but honestly, no joke, I use the front brake all the time. I use the front brake when I'm like bombing stair sets if I need to slow down. I use the front brake if I'm literally en route and like doing a downhill section. The only time you're ever going to go over the bars with the front brake is if you lock it up. So as long as you don't actually lock up the front brake and you just allow it to keep moving, you'll find that it will slow down quicker and sort of give you more maneuverability once you've learned how to control the front brake better. Epic. Tip number 6 is tyre pressure. We're coming to the end now, but I run 25 front and back. You'll find that dropping your tyre pressure down gives you more grip. A lot of you will know that already, but for some beginners out there, you might not have heard this tip. But basically the way it works is that obviously less pressure means your tyres are soggier, which means when you push into a corner, they're going to flatten out a little bit more and give you more sort of grip on the whole surface area of the tyre. If you're running high pressures like above 50 psi, you're going to start losing grip because the tyre isn't going to squash as much into things, which is going to make your tyres lose grip a little bit easier. So drop your tyre pressures. I wouldn't go below 20 though, because you'll probably get pinch punctures all the time. The final tip, which is tip number 7, is all to do with your suspension setup. I don't know if you guys will have seen videos about this one, but you might have done if you're searching for it. But I tend to run between 20 and 25% sag in the front and back. If you don't know what that is, it's basically when you're standing on your bike and you're not moving, but you're just standing on it. The amount of fork compression that happens when you're just stationary on the bike, that's your sag. And if your forks are sagging 20%, I find that that's sort of the optimal point where you really want your sag to be, front and back. Sometimes I go a little bit more sag, like I think I've got 25% sag in the front on this one, and maybe even 25 on the back as well, or even 30. Obviously more sag means softer suspension, which means you're probably not going to want to be jumping massive jumps as much, but it's going to be a lot better for doing rooty, rocky sections. So yeah, go out and look at your suspension. If you think they're too hard, let a little bit of air out until you've got a nice sort of bouncy setup like I do, and it works the dream. So then, that is the end of the video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope you found these tips useful, helpful, fun, insightful or intriguing in any way. And yeah, let me know in the comments if after you've tried some of these tips they've sort of helped you out a little bit. Hopefully they do. I will see you guys in the next video. Hope you have a good day. See you next time. I just wanna have some fun.